Right, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we'll start now. Is everything IT-wise set up? No.
Sorry? Yes.
Is all the IT set up and ready?
Yeah, the webcast live, yeah.
Yeah, we're now live.
Okay, then. We will start today's pension committee meeting. It will be webcast and online for the next 12 months. So if I could ask people to turn their microphones and their videos off unless they're speaking so that we could keep the bandwidth together, that would be appreciated. And we will now start the virtual meeting of Pension Committee, 26th of March 2021. Have we any apologies, Melanie?
Mike, can I ask you for that one, please?
Yes, of course. We have one apology, Chairman, and that's from Councillor Colin Greatrex.
Colin Greatrex. Okay, thank you very much. Any declarations of interest for today's meeting? No, I take silence as no declarations. And we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is pages 1 to 8 in your pack, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of December 2020. Has anyone got any comments, amendments or questions regarding those minutes?
Just one comment, if I may, Chair. Page 3, we talked about the audit of the accounts for 1920. And we did say that we'd notify members of the committee once the accounts had been signed off. We haven't notified you because that hasn't quite happened yet. It is imminent. There's been a lot of work done around property valuations, and we're still sort of engaging with the auditors, Ernst Young, on that. But we are hopeful that they will be signed off by the 31st of March, so next week. Okay,
that's good. Is that common around, or are we sort of last on the list? Or not?
We're not an outlier. No, there's still quite a few going on.
Okay, so it's just the systemic changes that have caused that rather than the issue.
Well, I think there's been some obviously sort of circumstances at Ernst Young that haven't helped. Yeah. But around the property piece, yeah, we're not alone on that.
Okay, so we're not a standalone. That's good. Yeah. Okay, then, so that's not a cause for concern, and hopefully we'll get that done next week then. So thank you for that, Melanie. Any more comments on the minutes? No, so we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is pages 9 to 18 in your pack. It's the minutes of the pensions panel held on the 11th of December 2020 and 2nd of March 2021. Are there any comments, questions or amendments to those minutes? I take it that there's no hands being risen. So we'll move on to the...
Chair, could I just go back, sorry, to the to page 7, the minutes of the Pensions Committee. There was one other matter, sorry, there that I didn't think to raise at the time.
Okay, we'll go back to agenda 3, yeah.
The exit credits policy that we put out to consultation, just to confirm that we didn't have any comments on that. So that policy has now been put on the website as live.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. We've got some more admissions, so if we could update the attendance as well. Okay, and to move on to the substantive part of today's agenda, it does look like it's quite a large agenda, but as you can see from the papers, a lot of it's for information. There's a lot of information, so it will be some good reports coming to us today. There's nothing, in my opinion, that's too contentious, but if you do have questions, please raise your hand and I'll bring you into the conversation at a fitting moment. So we'll move on to the Staffordshire Pension Fund Business Plan 2021-2022, which is pages 19 to 36, and we'll be having, as stated on the agenda, report from the corporate services, but it will be carried out by Melanie and Tim. So I'll pass over to yourself and Tim, please, Melanie.
All right, thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the annual business plan that we bring to committee. It's a bit of a report that looks back and looks forward at the same time. Clearly it's best practice and good governance to have a business plan, as I say, and we do that every year anyway. The business plan for 2021 is in Appendix A. I'm not proposing to go through that in any great detail, but I think it's fair to say that obviously the pandemic and working from home has provided some challenges this year, which we've had to overcome before focusing on the business plan. But, you know, we have still had some good achievements in there. excuse me, and we're talking about, you know, the member pensions portal, the My Self-Service portal. We did intend to have a promotional campaign where we went to visit employers in their workplaces to sort of promote the use of the member self-service portal. That was obviously scaled back, but, you know, again, we did have a good success with that, and we were pleased with the way things went. We have 20% uptake now of our membership of active and deferred members on the member self-service portal, which is really good. I think even some of the best funds are only around 50%, so we're pleased with our 20%. We've continued to make excellent progress with iConnect. The 3 biggest payroll providers that the pension fund interacts with are Capita, Liberator and the Stoke team. And basically all 3 now are sort of engaged with iConnect, and we're almost there with having them fully loaded onto that platform. Mike, I can see your hand up. Councillor Sutherland.
I'll wait till later. Sorry, I was just making sure that my hand was up, okay. So I'll wait till you finish. Okay.
And then the other thing that on the investment side this year, as I say, after a sort of a bit of a delayed start, we did do a appointment of the investment advisor, and Hymans Robertson, after a competitive tender process, were reappointed as investment advisors to the pensions panel. And we also did a framework tender for a property valuer, which has obviously been quite timely this year, given the sort of situations around property valuations. We did have to delay several of our activities for 2020-21, or we scaled them back, but work has still continued behind the scenes on some of those. So we'll talk about at the top of page, sort of paragraph 5. We talk about a covenant monitoring process being developed, and we've actually subscribed to the Hymans Robertson online funding level review tool, which will give us a bit more up-to-date information about our employers and their individual funding positions. And we've also commenced with a review of our AVC provision for the fund. I think it has to be sort of credit to the Treasury and Pension staff keeping the show on the road last year, and for all their dedication and hard work. And I'd like to sort of thank them really personally for that. I think the other thing that's pleasing about it is that the performance standards throughout 2021 haven't dropped either. As I say, it has been challenging. You know, some of the volumes have gone up, certainly in the arena of deaths and processing death, you know, payments, death grant, and putting, you know, sort of widows and widows on payroll. That's all quite intensive, and we've seen a 3rd increase in that, which is very sad. That's had a knock-on impact on the work. So again, I think, you know, all credit to the team. The other thing that we've had to do is review some of our processes, and one of the things that we're really pleased about is, you know, we've managed to get our retirement packs online. So instead of sending out 20+ pages to anybody that retires in the post, we send out a couple now. We can email those out, and all of that is on our website. So, you know, all helps the cause in terms of doing the job better and more efficiently and more effectively. We have lost several experienced staff over the year. Retirement of several of our sort of long-standing members has taken place. But that's actually created some promotional opportunities within the team, and that's been pleasing to be able to do that. And we've also managed to take on some new recruits, and really impressed with the standard of new recruits that we've been able to attract, and that should hopefully put us in a good position going forward. So I think on reflection, it's been a tough year, it's been a difficult year, but we've continued to achieve, and really pleased with the output of the team and everything they've been delivering really for the stakeholders of the fund. If I look forward then to, I should say we will full report on last year to the June committee meeting. Looking forward to the pensions business plan for 2021-22. That's in Appendix B of your papers on page 33. We've moved a lot more of the activity into business as usual activity, and tried to focus really just on the key development activities for 21-22. We've highlighted a few in the report, and I'll go through them now in turn. So on page 21, paragraph 12, we talk there about the MacLeod and the Sargent judgment. This is a really big project for the fund. We've identified now with some initial analysis that there are about 31,000 members in scope for recalculation and possible rectification. And that's just really if we look at the narrower parameters. If we look at the wider parameters with everybody that's got care membership or career average evaluation membership, so since 2014, that goes to 54,000 members. And we are being advised by the Scheme Advisory Board and the Local Government Association to go out and get the data for those 54,000 members. So collection of data is absolute critical to this. It is paramount. We need the software developers to help us to do the day-to-day task on this. But in the first instance, we've got to get the data and upload it into the system. And we fully expect that, 90% of the data will be clean, 10% of it won't, and the 10% of the data that isn't clean will take 90% of our time to sort out. So I think it's fair to say it is an employer responsibility to provide the data, but clearly it's our responsibility as a fund to collect and manipulate the data and actually undertake the recalculation. So McLeod, big project. We've got a working group together and we're working with a few of our employers at the moment to test what we're asking for and test the communications around that to make sure that when we go out to our 500 employers, we're actually asking the right questions and they understand what we're asking. So case of trying to get it right first time on that for us all. We don't know the time frame for that yet, whether we've got 2 years, 5 years or however long to rectify. And we haven't had the response to the consultation for the LGPS. So we are waiting for that as well. And that will give us a bit more of an indication of how long we've got to undertake the project. So a challenge there for all of us, really, I think, in the LGPS nationally. The second thing that's quite critical for us this year, and we've included it on the business plan, is the administration system tender. The contract with the current supplier doesn't end till December 2022, but changes within the IT infrastructure platform within the council have meant that there is a risk that we won't be able to continue using the system if we don't update certain things. So we decided to bring the tender forward on that, simply because we can't take the risk. And also, if we do end up changing provider, there will be an implementation period for that we need to build in. We've also got valuation next year, so we don't really want to be doing a tender when we're doing a valuation. So it's a huge task. It's a big system for the pension fund, clearly, and also for the authority. So we've engaged at the moment colleagues from procurement, ICT, the IGU team, and also legal services. As I say, we can't get this wrong or risk not having a system that works. So big project alongside McLeod. We sort of never want to shirk back at the workload, I suppose. And after the success of the My Pensions portal last year and the member self-service, we're going to go out this year, and we've already alerted our pensioners to it in the In Contact magazine that we're going to try and get them to use the My Pensions portal to access their payslips and P60s. We do recognise that the retired member cohort is slightly different. They're not all going to be familiar with technology, and we're not withdrawing the usual methods of paper, but it will be an opt-in that we'll want them to do and before we send out the paper. So the norm will be eventually for no paper copies to go out unless specifically requested. As I say, we had a 20% take up with our active and deferred members. So we're hoping that, we'll see the same sort of take up with our retired members. On the governance perspective, we're talking page 23 now, paragraph 21. We have the good governance review on the table as well to consider. Back in 2019, the Scheme Advisory Board commissioned a report to examine the effectiveness of governance in the LGPS. The final report has now been published, and there's a link to the report in the report at paragraph 21. The chair of the Scheme Advisory Board is going to reach out now to the MHCLG and ask them if they can put forward statutory guidance around the Good Governance project and the review and the recommendations within that. We have done an initial gap analysis for the fund against the outcome of the review and the recommendations therein. And I don't think we have any real concerns at this point in time. We will have to have a governance compliance statement, which again will be a specific document. And there'll also be a need for peer and external reviews of the fund and the governance arrangements every sort of 2 years. And then nothing there, I think, that we are not sort of familiar with or don't think that we will comply with. There'll also be an LGPS senior officer role to be decided on as part of that project as well. So that's all on the admin and the overall governance side of the fund. In terms of pensions investment, then the key development activity really is around climate strategy. And we've got a lot on climate risk and the scenario analysis that LGPS Central have undertaken for the fund later on today's agenda. And they are obviously going to present to the meeting later today. I think climate risk has become a big issue, both for councils and pension funds. And I think we can't ignore it going forward. We already do a lot of work around responsible investment and engagement, and we report on that as part of the quarterly panel meeting papers. We've got to build on the outcome of the climate risk report that LGPS Central have done for us and look towards putting a climate strategy in place to take us through to 2050, really. So working with LGPS Central and Hymans Robertson, we're going to use the data from the climate risk report alongside further analysis as a baseline, really, on which to move forward from. We'll consider the impact of our investment strategies and some different investment strategies that we might look at, and the impact that will have on aligning us with the Paris Agreement and sort of the commitment to target net zero at some point in the future. And clearly we'll need to set sort of benchmarks and milestones along the way to do that. And alongside that climate strategy, we'll also have a stewardship plan. And I know the chair's been quite keen that we don't just focus on the environmental, we don't forget the social and the governance aspects of RI&E as well. And I think that's where the stewardship plan will be a good document to sort of look at not only where we'll engage on, you know, climate related activity, but also where we'll engage on the social and the governance activity as well. So a lot for the investment team to look at as well this year, and the plan, I say, is quite ambitious, but I'm quite confident that the team can deliver to the best of their abilities on the plan. So I will pause there, I think, for any questions on the plan before handing over to Tim, who'll just take us through the cost and the budget for the next year as well.
Okay, thank you for that update. I think we've got a good success with the portal there, so that's all good news. And the McLeod, I think that's always going to be one of the more difficult projects that's going to come into this pension. So I feel in very safe hands, and certainly when the software is developed and we have the data, I think we can start that moving. But I would appreciate the committee to be regularly updated on that, and I'm sure it's in the work programme anyway. So I'm sure we'll get regular and progressive updates on that, and we'll hopefully get some software for that works. So has anyone else got any questions? I will have some questions for Tim later on, so I'll just pre-warn him unless anyone else wants to come in. There's no hands raised.
I think Gordon's got his hand up actually.
Has he? I
yeah,
see that one. Okay, then over to Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Yep.
Yes, Melanie. Melanie, you mentioned, and you'll have to forgive me if I don't get it all right, but the staff retirement has increased, I understand, in the county and in the people that use the pension funds. How much is that different to what normally is? Because the reason I'm asking that is because at Cannock Chase, I've noticed that a lot more staff than normal have taken early retirement, stroke redundancy, or moved on to other jobs since we've been in this pandemic. And I was wondering whether that's the same throughout the county, and is it going to cause any problems for the pension funds payout? That's number one. And then the other one, Chair, if I may, is and I have to forgive me because I'm not familiar with these anachronisms that are mentioned. But I remember saying the IT tender and the at-risk issue on page 26, I think it is. Yep, page 26. If Melanie could explain and expand a little bit more on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So the retirements I referred to were the retirements in the pensions team itself. But I think generally what we have seen is a lot more of the deferred membership taking their benefits. So, you know, when they reach 55, they're sort of taking the benefits. We'd have to get some volume numbers. We haven't got them to hand at the minute. I don't know whether Simon or John have got any comments. Simon's coming on now to help out. Simon, do you want to say anything about the retirements that we've seen?
Yeah, that's fine, Mel. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep. There hasn't really been a significant increase in retirees from an active status, so we've not seen any trends there particularly. So, you know, one or two extras wouldn't really make any difference. But yes, I'd echo your point on the deferred members. There seems to be a significant increase in our deferred members taking their pensions early, and just to remind the committee that they can take them from 55. So whether that's been an indirect impact on the pandemic, we're not sure. But yes, it seems to be a trend going forward that more of our deferreds are taking their pensions perhaps a little earlier than we anticipated. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the impacts of that will come through in the actuarial valuation, you know, sort of next year, really. John, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, I was just going to, I think the actuary actually views the crystallisation of benefits in some cases as a positive thing for the pension fund, because you're not accruing future liability for members. So it's not necessarily negative if we are seeing that. And I think the year-on-year figures aren't necessarily showing an overall large increase in retirements for the benchmarking figures we do.
Okay, thank you. Is that satisfactory for you, Gordon?
It's on mute. I'll assume so.
I assume he's happy with that then.
I'll go on to the piece about the tender. Yeah, so the tender, I mean, the risk, I suppose, is that we don't have a system when I was referring to it. And obviously we can't, you know, sort of risk that happening, because otherwise we can't process benefits, we can't pay our pensioners. It's probably unlikely that that would happen, because obviously the current supplier wouldn't withdraw the services. We would have to extend the contract. But I think the risk is around changing provider. So that's what takes the time. And if the output of the tender was that there was a change in provider, then clearly we've got a whole lot of processes to change. There'll be implementation timescales and factored in. So there are any risks when you're going out to tender, particularly for a system that is sort of something you rely on so much. But by sort of doing it early, getting the right people in the room at the same time, we hope to mitigate some of that risk, really.
I was just going to add now that the one thing we will be doing is moving to a hosted solution. So currently Staffordshire ICT hosts the Altair product for us. So whichever new provider we pick, it will be that provider's hosting centre that we use rather than the IT network. So whatever happens, there will be an implementation to the new arrangements.
But longer term, that external hosting will reduce some of the risk as well.
Yeah, it should actually, and also reduce some of the resource required within the section, because currently there is some technical IT resource we have to have in pensions to do upgrades to the system. And once it's a hosted solution, we should no longer need that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll just pre-warn Tim then if there's no other questions about what I'm going to be centering on. It's quite straightforward. I just wanted it to be minuted and brought up in a committee discussion. From the indicative pension fund cost 2020-2023, we see huge increases in the actuarial fees going from 22 to 23, from 170,000 up to 320. Sort of pre-mentioned why, but I'd like it sort of explained more to the committee. But also on the investment management fees, I've been very keen since I started as chairman to keep fees under control, because benchmarking does show, although we get value for money, they are still at the very high end, if not above the average. So when we look at the investment management fees, which do not include the transition costs, we've got between 8 and 10% increase year on year. Now, If that's not including the transition fees, we're going to get even more fees despite being above the benchmarking anyway. So I have brought up a concern about the fees in this committee before, so I would like that to be further explained if you could. So over to you, Tim.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah. Sorry, the cost and resources sections, this is sort of paragraph 27 below. And we see this less of a budget, more as an indicative cost, because sort of the areas of expense at paragraph 27, and one of those is particularly hard to forecast, as the chair mentioned, which is investment management costs, which is based on activity, assets under management. So running through the table, and I'll sort of pick up your concerns as we run through that, if that's okay, Chair. The pensions administration, which is the top box, you can see that's fairly consistent, and that is the staffing of the section. So as you can imagine, there was less fluctuation there and in other areas. The governance section, now this includes the costs of Lgbs Central. This is our asset pool. As a 1/9 owner, our costs in 2021 is estimated around £1 million. So there is some increase as the 21 and 22 as the years pass by, as you expect further staffing and more activity in the pool. So there's further cost there. The other box I wanted to mention, or section, was the investment management fees. We forecast a small saving in 2021. This is due to some, I suppose, short-term measures. We've removed a hedge fund. Hedge funds are very expensive, so we're seeing less fees there. But going forward, and to answer your question, really, this is to do with the increase in the move towards private markets. So this is specifically infrastructure, where we've made allocations of around 75 million. The commitments, although we made recently, haven't been called yet, so we haven't been starting paying fees on them. So we'll start paying fees on that in 2022. There's increasing allocations to private equity, which is quite expensive. And there's also increasing allocations to private debt. And some of that we're looking to move into a pooled solution. So this is with Lgbs Central, where fees should be lower due to economies and scale and going with other investors. But we're not there yet, and we're not putting all our allocation into Lgbs Central this year, although we're hopeful in future years as they have a new head of private markets and the team gains more trust and confidence that we'll be allocating more to Lgbs Central. But they're still going to be expensive asset classes. And this ties in with, I suppose, the information we brought to previous committees around benchmarking, where we sort of foresaw an increase in cost, but we're looking at it on a net value basis. As though if we're spending a bit more money on fees, but we're getting a bit back more on performance. So this sort of ties in with this being less of a budget, and we'll justify that on using these benchmarking techniques such as CEM, which we'll hopefully bring to September committee if it's in previous years. And on the administration side, a sit for benchmarking.
Could I just come in there, Tim, just to clarify a point there? We're going into obviously the infrastructure, which is quite an expensive entry point in the private equity debt. Is there any analysis there on the increase of volatility and risk towards the pension fund as well?
Well, so infrastructure it will be a new asset class for us as a fund. In terms of risk, I mean, infrastructure, there's different types of infrastructure. There's we see it as like a spectrum. So you'll have your core infrastructure, which might be built solid. You can imagine like a toll bridge or something like that. There's no construction risk there. The returns might be inflation linked, so that we wouldn't see that as risky. And we're looking towards more that core end of the infrastructure rather than sort of anything speculative around the other end. We've made an allocation to a renewable fund, but a lot of those assets are up and running. There's less development risk there. So we see it as although it's a return-seeking asset, we class it as, we don't see it on the same risk spectrum as, say, private equity, where some of that, venture private equity particularly can be quite risky, where we have a low allocation there. So we do class it as return-seeking. So there is, of course, with any investment, there's an element of risk. But we're tending towards the lower end of the risk spectrum with regards to infrastructure.
Okay, with the private equity in the debt, would it be right to assume that this is increasing our risk and volatility within the fund?
Private equity has been there for a number of years. I think we invested the allocation isn't increasing as such. There's a 3.5% allocation in the fund, but there's a continual recommitment. Because we have quite a mature portfolio now, because we've been allocating for a number of years. So a lot of the funds are coming to, they're either finalised and finished, because they're sort of 10 to 15 year funds. So we're having to recommit to a number of new funds to maintain that allocation. Okay,
so it's more of a compounding effect. The numbers are bigger, but the percentage are the same. So it's compounding effect, really, not increased volatility.
It's not increased volatility, no. It's increasing activity, I suppose, in a way. And private debt, we've been building this up over a number of years. And we see this is, I suppose it's a bit more steady eddy private debt because it is debt to companies. We've got quite a solid 5% allocation. It's taken us around 4 or 5 years to get up to that 5% allocation because you're committing to funds and it takes a while for them to draw down on these funds. So we've been having discussions recently about maybe increasing the risk slightly in our private debt portfolio because we've got quite a vanilla portfolio, and we'll bring further information on that to the next pensions panel.
Can I just comment, Chair, as well, just a couple of things on that? I mean, the increase in fees, you know, when we are starting to slightly reduce our allocation to equities to actually fund the move to alternatives around the private debt, private equity and infrastructure, you know, we're going from fees, say a passive fee, and this is just a broad brush fee. If you're investing in a passive fund at around 7 to 10 basis points, we're actually going into alternative products where you're talking 70 basis points plus. And that's really the difference. And what you're paying for there is the expertise of the manager and their skill. So in private debt, for instance, we only go into the senior secured lending space on that area. And clearly we want managers to do all the due diligence around those funds to make sure that there are no defaults and we're not party then to any defaults. And that's really what you're paying for. Private equity, a little bit more around the illiquidity premium. So, you know, the fees are higher because, again, these are new companies. They're actually doing different things with the companies. But the returns come from that locking your money up for longer, and infrastructure we hope to be the same. So hopefully there will be a cost benefit. It will be more cost, but we get that extra return from that illiquidity premium as well.
We're coming from quite a low base as well. We've been quite a low cost fund for a number of years, with a high allocation to passive equities, which, like Mel says, it's sort of like 0.05% around in cost. And you're moving up to some of the private markets, they're kind of like 1%. So it could be 20 times the fees, if you know what I mean. But there's probably 20 times the expertise required because passive funds just track an index, and it sort of can be done by systems and computers. And so we're paying more for sort of more niche expertise and going forwards.
We'll move on. I do want the committee, certainly in the future, to certainly monitor that and certainly do some quite close benchmarking, because I do see the fees as accelerating. I know there's a strategy behind it, but it's one of those things that if you don't keep a grip on from a committee perspective, can get out of control. And certainly when the markets turn, it can be doubly bad for us then. And we do want to keep whatever gains we get within that risk into the pension fund rather than just spending on expertise. I think we've got a good structure, but it's one of those things I do think we need to keep a hold on the fees, certainly given our position in the benchmarking figures at the moment. So,
yeah, and there's a lot more transparency in there as well. We're trying to be more, you know, with these fees. So, you know,
can I just comment, Chair, sorry, on the actuarial? You did ask a question about actuarial and the increase for that. 22-23 reflects actuarial valuation year. So every third year, the fees will almost double because of the work around the actuarial valuation.
Yeah, I wanted that one just to be read on records. Thank you.
The other fee element, just to mention before we finish, is the property expenses. We've seen this. There isn't any comparison there to previous years, sort of, but these have increased to around sort of, and this is around vacant property costs. And this is due to the impact of the pandemic. So we thought, you know, we've increased the forecast cost for property. I mean, this is something I suppose you couldn't have foresaw up to a year ago with the sort of how property has been ravaged by you know, COVID and the associated lockdowns. So we've increased the future costs to do with vacant property going forward significantly. So hopefully we'll see with the end of lockdowns and increasing economic activity whether this will hopefully come in under budget. But we've upped our forecast for that area.
Yeah, that's a prudent thing to do. So, yeah. Okay, are there any other questions from the floor at all?
Chair, if I may, I've had my hand up for some time now. I was, and it was on exactly on the same point that you raised, table 1. I won't repeat what you've already said, but I will make just the overall comment that if you look at the 2-year period, we're looking at, and I know they're indicative, costings, and I know that you've covered it in paragraph 33 to a degree, but that it is critical that cost is one thing, but return is another. And I want to see more visibility in terms of what I call a potential runaway train on costs. Regrettably, the one that stands out, it's only a small amount in comparison, but it's still significant percentage increase from 1.1 million to 1.3 with our Lgbs central costs. And we've got to keep pushing for the return and the value that we get out of it. So certainly if I'm on pensions going forward, I will be looking at that, because we're in difficult times going ahead. And one of the key barometers will be our control on costs. Thank you, Chair.
That's very good points. Thank you for that, Councillor Sutherland. And would anyone like to come back on that at all, or are we happy to move on?
I would just say that we'll come on to that. There is an item on the agenda later on where we talk about the Lgbs Central Budget and Business Plan, and I'll touch on that there to answer Councillor Sutherland's point.
Yeah, fantastic. Very good. Anybody else? I don't seem to be getting the hands appearing on mine. So is there any other hands? No. Okay, so we'll end that agenda item. I'm glad we got some of the pieces minuted there, and there are certainly, as I say, it's a constant theme in this committee about the costs. Returns are one thing, as Mike said, but costs are the other. So closely monitoring that going forward, not just in the pooling fund, but in terms of our commitment to fund managers and expertise. Suddenly the word experts getting used a lot at the moment. So on that note, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is the Staffordshire Pension Fund Funding Strategy Statement and Investment Strategy Statement. It's pages number 37 to 114 in your packs, and Melanie will be presenting this report. So, Melanie.
Thank you, Chair. So the Funding Strategy Statement and the Investment Strategy Statement are two key documents, really, that set out how the Staffordshire Pension Fund does things and its attitude to a number of things. Paragraph 6 on page 38 talks about the FSS governs how employer liabilities are measured, the pace at which these liabilities are funded, and how employers or pools of employers pay for their own liabilities. So it's a bit like our Bible. If we get a question from our employers, the FSS is the document that we refer to, and we refer them to as well for the way that we conduct our business. We do keep it regularly updated, and the last update was approved by the committee on the 27th September 2019, and that really sort of reflected some valuation changes around assumptions and the likelihood of McLeod, and that increased the likelihood of success. And there was also a consultation at that time around the valuation and whether we had intra-valuations or whether they extended the valuation timescales from 3 to 4 years, and we updated it to deal with that. On the 23rd of September last year, MHCLG came along with some changes to the LGPS regulations, and it was really in response to the pandemic and employers who may have been struggling at that time to pay contributions, and this was really around giving employer flexibility. And paragraph 9 there talks about some of those changes that we've put into the FSS this time to deal with those. So there were things around when an employer might be permitted to ask for a change in their contribution rate, and also the contra to that is when if a fund had issues or concerned about an employer, they might be able to ask them to change their contribution rate as well. So it was a two-way thing. We've already talked about the exit credit policy that we presented to committee last time. Clearly exits from the fund is a big thing potentially, and having that policy in place now is good, and that's been incorporated into the FSS. And the final thing was around something called a deferred debt agreement, which is something akin to what we refer to as a funding arrangement, and is something that we do with the housing associations. So they want to close entrance to the fund to new membership, and they want to sort of create an exit debt, and they pay off that debt over a period of time. And those deferred debt agreements really formalise that in the LGPS regulations. And the FSS has really just been changed to reflect all of those things. Again, because employers are impacted, we need to go out to consultation with that document, and we are proposing to go out for a month's consultation throughout April with that document. Clearly, any changes that are significant we will bring back to the committee, but if they are sort of small changes, we'll ask you to delegate the responsibility for signing that document off to the Director of Corporate Services. So that's the FSS. The investment strategy statement, again, just documents really how the investment strategy for the fund is determined and how we implement it. And the areas that the ISS covers are listed there in paragraph 12 on page 39. So it's things about diversification, the suitability of investments, the percentage of investments that we'll put in different asset classes, our attitude to risk, our approach to pooling and RI and engagement, and also, you know, the stewardship of assets. So lots of things there that, again, really good source of information and another Bible around the investments and our approach to investments. Again, we updated this post-valuation to reflect the assumptions used in the valuation around the investment returns and various other things. But this time we've just tweaked it to reflect what the activity in 2020. So changes with the investments that we've made in the pool, changes to a couple of benchmarks. So very small changes. In terms of consultation, we, because it's not sort of a direct impact on the wider community within Staffordshire in terms of the LGPS and the employers, we basically use the consultants, the investment consultants, Hymans Robertson, and the independent advisors as that source of consultation to make sure everything was okay. So no wider consultation on the ISS, but just recommend both documents to the committee today.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Are there any comments from members? I've got no hands being raised, so I'll move to the recommendations that we approve, because there are some delegated authorities needed. Has anybody got any concerns to raise or is against the recommendations? If so, could you raise your hands? If not, we'll consider silence as acceptance. I think we have approval for both recommendations, recommendations 1 and 2, with no questions. So thank you for that. Have you got anything else to add, Melanie, to agenda item 6?
No, thank you. As I say, we'll put the funding statement out for consultation to employers, and we do expect a few comments on that, but we'll bring those back to committee if they are material.
Thank you very much, Melanie. That's perfect. Okay, we're moving on to agenda item number 7, which is the exclusion of the public. But before we do that, I'd just like to say to the committee, we have some retiring members from the committee. We have Derek Davis, who's been with the council since 1985, who's leaving the council and has been a very active member on this pension fund and committee for a very long time. So thank you very much for your service. And also Martin Titley, who's a member of this committee, will be leaving, who's been a very good member of this committee, but also very good chairman of the Audit and Standards Committee. And he leaves a very good legacy behind him. So thank you both for the work you've done. But I will also be leaving the council, not for any other reason that during this mandate, in this exact order, I brought a dog, got married and had my first child. And it is a rather large workload at certainly my age, having a job as well. So I will be leaving the council, and I don't rule out coming back in the future. But for now, I think family time is very important. So this will be the last committee I chair. And I do think we've got a very good pension fund and very good officers and actuaries and a very good setup here. And I think that shows in the results. So I thank the officers behind the scenes and this committee and panel and board for monitoring what I think is a very successful fund. So thank you for that. If Derek would like to say anything or not, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Yep. Over to you, Derek.
I've been a member, excuse me, I've been a member, I think, since 1990 of the pension panel. I'm not sure that that's correct, but I think that's right. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I wouldn't be retiring now, other than for ill health reasons. and I think that you can hear that I'm not articulate enough to measure up to what's going on, and I've lost it, in other words. Thanks very much for your nice comments, and it'll be my last meeting, this will, and thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your service, Derek. It's been a pleasure. On that note, given that Martin Titley is not here, we will move to the exclusion of the public. It's for the Chairman's move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, which is indicated below. So we will exclude the public now and take a short break while the webcast turns itself off. If you could inform me when that's done, please. Thank you.